All right. So when we look at kind of progression circulatory system, the first one is diffusion. Second, excuse me. The second one is diffusion, but with multiple layers. So not only do we have diffusion from the outside, here, fluids being taken into the gasovascular cavity, we have diffusion on the inside as well. God.
No, that's three.
Something about like Mega Millions.
Where's that those three?
All right. So we start looking at multicellular organisms with multiple germ layers, right? There's both an ectoderm and an endoderm here, but we have diffusion both on the inside and on the outside, getting to both layers. They're still thin enough. They're only a few cell layers thick, so diffusion really does cut it. There's enough diffusion on the inside and on the outside to really get to all the cells. As you start progressing, though, and you start getting to larger organisms that are multicellular, that have more and more cell layers, diffusion's not going to cut it, right? I don't care how efficient diffusion is, oxygen is not going to reach the inside of your organs from your skin, right? So we need to find a new system. So diffusion cuts it for organisms that have very, very thin cell layers, but as soon as we start looking to organisms that have thicker layers of cells or more cell layers, we need to develop our circulatory systems. There are two major circulatory systems out there. Now we're talking about more complex, right? We're talking about organisms that have multiple cell layers. The two major systems are open circulatory systems and closed circulatory systems. What do we have?
Closed.
Yeah, we are closed. Your blood stays maintained within the circulatory system. It does not just move freely around your body. Blood doesn't typically rush out of your blood vessels. If it did, you'd have something like internal bleeding. Internal bleeding is not a good thing. You could die from that if blood doesn't stay maintained within your circulatory system. So we are closed. Other organisms have more of an open circulatory system where blood kind of flows from chamber to chamber. There's not really these arteries and veins that keep blood contained. It also means that you typically have a mix between blood and other fluids in that case, and they call it hemolymph, is basically what they kind of call that mixing material. So looking at images, you can kind of see with insects, they really kind of have a heart chamber. They move things around, but they really kind of have this larger chamber that fluid and blood is mixing together, which would be kind of the hemolymph, hemo meaning blood, lymph meaning other body fluids. With us, our lymph fluids, it's in our lymph nodes, that's kind of in our tissues. That fluid doesn't really mix with our blood. It stays separate, hence we have a closed system. Everybody okay? All right. Evolution of the system. We can start. We'll go back one. Here, they actually have a number of different hearts. But here, if we kind of were to go up one stage, we can start with a one-chamber heart, and we can go to what's considered a two-chambered heart. Fish have a two-chambered heart. So I'm just using this diagram to help talk about a fish. And if I had a fish, it might look something like that. And if I had a fish and this was its heart, it would have two chambers. It would have an atrium and a ventricle. The atrium is really are the collection chambers of our hearts. The ventricle is really the pumping chamber. The ventricles are the muscular chambers that really push blood around the system. So fish really only have a two-chamber heart. They have an atrium and ventricle. It gets pumped around. If you notice this, there's only one loop, systemic loop. So here, if this was a fish, you might have gills here. So when the blood is pumped, it will pass through the gills, become oxygenated, and then just travel around the body and go back. And there's just one loop. There's not a separate loop for the lungs or the gills and a separate loop for the system. So that's kind of the beginning of kind of our closed circulatory systems. Moving up a level, we go from a 2-chambered heart to a 3-chambered heart. It's a little bit more efficient. Notice when I go to a 3-chambered heart, do I have just one loop? No, the evolutionary advantage going from the 2 to the 3 is now we have 2 loops. We have what's known as a pulmonary loop. Anything dealing with pulmonary means we have a pulmonary embolism. It's a blood clot where? Both sides. Lungs. So pulmonary embolism is really a blood clot in your lungs. So here, when I move to the 3-chambered heart, I now have a pulmonary loop and a systemic loop. Pulmonary loop is pumping blood, deoxygenated blood, low oxygen blood to the lungs to become oxygenated, coming back to the heart, and then pumping that blood out to the system. It's far more efficient. Now, with that though, there are only 3 chambers. There are atrium 1, atrium 2, and there's only 1 ventricle. The problem is this: blood collects in atrium 1 from the body with low oxygen, goes into the ventricle. Ventricle contracts, sends that blood out to the lungs. Blood comes back from the lungs to the other atrium, now full of blood, full of oxygen. But notice, both the deoxygenated and the oxygenated blood are going to the same ventricle. So you get a mixing. You can see how it's not completely 100% efficient. You get a mixing of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. Now, does it kind of keep it separated and try to keep the deoxygenated on one side? Yeah, it tries to keep it separated, but is there going to be mixing? Yes, there's going to be mixing. So this is our 3-chambered heart. And these are amphibians. Moving up to the next level of classification, right? Fish would be the lowest level of the tree. Amphibians would be 1 step up, right? Living mainly on land, in water, right? But still having to kind of give birth or lay eggs in the water. Moving up from there, we have reptiles. So just kind of think of the next level. What are the 2 key evolutionary traits that reptiles have that amphibians do not, that allow reptiles to spend more time on land? Not the heart. The heart's part. It is more efficient, but not focus on that right now. Right. So if you've ever seen like amphibians, a lot of certain types of frogs, not toads, but some frogs, and you look at like salamanders, the best ones to think of. You put a salamander on land for a little while, the little guy's going to dry out pretty quick. Right? They need very, very moist skin because they actually allow a lot of oxygen to diffuse through their skin into their blood. So amphibians need moist skin all the time, which means they can come out of the water, but they can't go too far from it. What's the other thing that keeps them very close to water? Reproduction. They lay eggs, so do reptiles. There is that role there. They still have external fertilization, where reptiles have internal. That's part of it, but that's not necessarily the land aspect of it. But it has something to do with their eggs. They might. Some of them, I'll show an axolotl. You'll see one in a second that have external gills. It really deals with reptile eggs are basically just what Mo said. They're impermeable to water. They hold water better. They develop what's known as the amniotic sac in a more protective outer layer. Now, their eggs aren't like hen's eggs that are like hard shelled. They're more leathery shelled, but their eggs can be laid on land. Right, so now there's a protective layer that keeps moisture in. There's an amniotic sac here to help keep moisture in, where amphibians, they just have moist skin and their eggs need to be laid in water. So eggs must be laid in water. And then, so the big thing is eggs. And then if you picture a snake or any other type of reptile, you can see their skin is much, has a lot more of a leather component. So they maintain water better. So they can get further away from water. All right, so back to the heart. If this was a 3-chambered heart, I'd make up this term. There's no such thing as a 3.5-chambered heart. It does not exist. But the best way to explain this is to call it a 3.5-chamber heart. When we look at our heart muscle, there is a separation between the 2 ventricles for us. We have 4 chambers. That muscle segment that separates the left ventricle from the right ventricle is known as a septum. Notice here, this septum is fairly well formed, although it is not complete. There still is this gap here that can get a little bit of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood mixing. Okay? But is it far more efficient than this? This one does not have a septum. There's no separation there. So when you go from the amphibians to the reptiles, you develop a little bit more separation. You develop that septum, which makes it a little bit more efficient. There's less mixing. And then, when you move up on the evolutionary ladder, you move to animals and birds, or mammals and birds. Now, that septum is fully formed. There's complete division between the left and right ventricles. So now that the oxygenated blood does not mix. It does not mix. That's a good question. That's something you could definitely see on the AP exam. Here's your amphibians with external gills. It's kind of a happy-looking guy. So, anybody know what it is? It's an axolotl. Is it on the thing? No. It did external gills, which is just kind of interesting. It's just a cool picture, so I left it there. All right. Human circulatory system. What we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go through just a little bit of the heart, and then we'll kind of stop right here. So there's arteries, there's veins, there's capillaries, there's arterioles, there's venules. They're basically all ranging in size. Arteries are under higher pressure, which I'll talk about later. Veins are under lower pressure. Arteries are going away from the heart. Veins are going back to the heart. That's the key thing. So we'll kind of break that down a little bit. We do not have to memorize all the different names or anything. That's more for anatomy. We don't need to do that. There are some key structures to the heart. There's pericardium and myocardium. This pericardium is a lot like almost like a plastic bag, like a very, very thin tissue layer that just protects the heart, surrounds the heart. So it's almost like taking your heart and putting it in a little Ziploc bag. That's what the pericardium is. The myocardium is really the muscle layer of the heart, which is basically the main components of the heart. So it's really the muscle of the heart. Atrium and ventricles, atriums collect, ventricles pump, right? So atriums take blood in, ventricles are sending blood out. We already mentioned the pulmonary circulation versus the systemic circulation. Right? Pulmonary is circulation between the heart and the lungs, and systemic is circulation between the heart and the system. For people taking down written notes, I'll pause for a second here because there's a lot of stuff up there you might want to jot down. Quick thing, as people who are copying notes, do you think Chromebooks have helped you in the classroom or hurt you in the classroom? I think honestly, not that you guys have come on strong lately in terms of testing. You guys have been doing better. But I really do think it was an advantage when I printed out PowerPoints, which I did for every PowerPoint. I printed them out and gave them like the way, like 3 slides with the notes next to it. I really felt like that was a major advantage because it was just you could kind of doze off for a second and kind of lose track. But then when you get focused, there's a place to kind of jot down your notes and keep track of everything as well. Unfortunately, they don't really let us pretty much anymore. But we use it at home. Like I know I can't print it they really won't let me make those copies anymore, or at least they're frowning upon it. But if this is hurting you, do something different. Print off the PowerPoints, bring it to class, right, and take your notes on a PowerPoint, put your Chromebook on it. But I definitely see it depends on who you are. For myself, I would be helped by this because I could not listen and take notes at the same time. I just couldn't do it. So I know, like for myself, I'm sure in some classes you sit back and stare at a Chromebook, and teachers might get mad at you. I don't really, as long as I feel like you're focusing, because that's how I would. I can't take notes at all and try to listen at the same time. So, but just curious, we were kind of having that conversation. Do you have any classes where your teacher won't let you use a Chromebook?
Yeah.
He doesn't do any activity related to
It's just the biggest number unless you like.
You don't write in class at all? You just all write by hand?
Yeah, he's like, I want to hear it. Go ahead. He's really strict. I think it's because like in the same time when you taught someone not like taking notes, not like. I think you absorb information better when you hand write it.
I do too.
He's thinking.
No, it's a catch-22. Like honestly, I could very easily make you copy all these notes down, but you know how much additional time that would add to our classes. Like think about that. Think about if you were just handwriting these notes and had to get everything down, not just like extra details, but everything. That'd be ridiculous. Like it adds the class by 3-4 times longer than what. Anyways, we'll finish up on this, and then we'll kind of quiz tomorrow. Hopefully, if I'm here, if my boys aren't still sick, we'll figure it out. Here's our heart. It is a first-person view of the heart. So this is like my heart in the chest. This is like my heart in the chest. Right? That's why this is considered the right side, and this is considered the left side. So it's a first-person view of the heart. The heart's made up of chambers, atriums, ventricles, and valves. Anybody here have a heart murmur? Okay, there's a heart murmur. My brother has one a little bit. A heart murmur is really just kind of like improper blood flow in the heart. If the blood's not flowing smoothly, you kind of get like this little vibration, murmuring kind of effect on it. And that's what a heart murmur is, which could be a few different things. But a lot of times heart murmurs deal with valves that don't quite close all the way. Therefore, you get like a little trickle of blood. It could be nothing. Heart murmurs might be nothing, or it could be something that you need to deal with. But in any case, so going through this, we have it numbered on the right-hand side. The first thing is blood coming back to the body. That's where we start. And the two leading veins, the two veins that all the tributaries flow into, all your arteries and capillaries flow into, are the superior and the inferior vena cava. All right, so that is one. And that is one, the vena cava. The superior above, the inferior below. Now, they flow directly into the atrium, which is two, which is the right atrium. All right, so here is our right atrium. From our right atrium, it flows through what we call the right atrioventricular valve. It's known as the tricuspid valve. There are 3 cusps that open and close. That's where the word tricuspid comes from. However, the easier way to remember, to keep down vocab terms, is to call it the atrioventricular valve, right? Because it's the valve between the atrium and the ventricle, the atrioventricular valve. And therefore, you only need to remember right and left. So this is the left AV. This would be the right AV. Right atrioventricular valve, the left atrioventricular valve. So blood flows through the right atrium, through the right atrioventricular valve into the right ventricle. We are going through pulmonary loop here. We're going through the pulmonary loop. So from our right ventricle, we are going to the pulmonary semilunar valve. So here, we're going right through here. This is your semilunar valve. Semilunar is kind of the shape. The tricuspid is an active valve requiring energy. The semilunar valves are one-way valves. Anybody ever been on a boat? You have like scuppers in the back of the boat where water can flow out, but the little ball prevents water from going back in. That's exactly what these are. Blood can flow out, but it can't back up. The valves will close off if blood tries to back up. All right. Now it goes into what's known as your pulmonary arteries. One thing, pulmonary arteries. Arteries are always under high pressure, always leading away from the heart. These are the only arteries that carry low oxygen blood. Every other artery is carrying high oxygen blood. So just realize the pulmonary arteries are a little flipped, but they're simply going to your lungs, getting oxygen, and then coming back. So the pulmonary arteries are going out. The pulmonary veins are coming back. The pulmonary veins are the only veins that are carrying oxygenated blood, blood with oxygen coming back from the heart. They reach the left atrium. They go through the left atrioventricular valve, sometimes known as the mitral valve. So you have the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve are the other terms for it, but left atrioventricular, through the left ventricle. And from there, it's pumped to the body. And what's the main artery of the body? The aorta. So it goes through the aorta, which is right here. And that is the aortic semilunar valve. The aortic semilunar valve. This is I feel like it's important to kind of know the different components of the heart. You are not going to have a labeling section on the AP biology exam. But how they break this down on the AP biology exam is like this. They could give you something that represents the heart, like a shape like a box, and they might kind of have you like show blood flow from there. So understanding the different structures of the heart here and blood flow through this will help you decipher whatever structure they happen to give you about blood flow. So you won't get one they have to label and memorize all these structures. However, it is important to get the understanding of how blood flows through the heart. No, we're going to go over that. Yeah. One thing they focus on, they focus on the saturation curve of oxygen, which we'll talk about, and then they focus on blood pressure, how blood volume and blood pressure changes as you move through the system, which is good. All right, we're done.